My father's dying words were supposed to protect me. "Arthur," he whispered, "family is the only thing that lasts." He was wrong. On that deathbed, while my father could barely breathe, my 3 brothers and my stepmother, a woman younger than me, whispered poison in his ear. They told him I was a drug addict, a thief, a failure. They forged his will. They drugged him so he couldn't speak. And while the ink was still wet on the papers, they had the police drag me out of the mansion in front of the entire staff. They stole $100 million real estate empire from me. But here's what they didn't know. I was the one who managed every single account. I knew where every penny came from. I knew where every dirty dollar was buried. And I spent 7 years preparing for this moment. Today, I'm coming home, and by the time I'm done, they won't just be poor. They'll be begging for the mercy they denied me. If you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or pushed to the ground by people who claim to love you, if you've ever dreamed of the moment when karma finally catches up, you're gonna love this story. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because what happens next is the most satisfying revenge you'll hear all week. Let me take you back to where this all began. My name is Arthur Sterling, and I was the youngest of 4 siblings in a family that owned everything, and I mean everything. My father, Elias Sterling, was a titan in the commercial real estate world. While most billionaires were content with one empire, my father had built 3 shopping centers across 12 states, office buildings in major metropolitan areas, residential complexes worth hundreds of millions. The man was a legend. And for 30 years, he ran it all with precision, with discipline, and with one simple rule: business is family, and family is business. That worked, until his health started to fail. I was 28 years old when my father's first heart attack happened. It was a Tuesday morning. I was in the office. I was always in the office, reviewing acquisition documents for a new property development in downtown Chicago. The call came from my father's secretary: "Arthur, get to the hospital now." I remember the sound of my shoes echoing through that hospital corridor. Sterile white walls, beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic that makes you feel like death is right around the corner. My father was lying in that bed, tubes connected to his chest, his skin gray as concrete. "Dad," I said, taking his hand, "you're going to be fine." He looked at me with those sharp, calculating eyes he'd always had. "Arthur, you're the only one who understands this business. You're the only one who cares about the legacy. Promise me you'll protect it." I promised. God, how I promised. But my father didn't know that his 3 older sons, Julian, Silas, and Cashin, were already circling like vultures. They had never worked a day in their lives. Not one day. Julian was a venture capitalist who burned through money faster than he could make it. Silas was a cryptocurrency bro before crypto even existed, constantly bragging about deals that never materialized. And Cashin was the worst. He was a trust fund kid who'd never even opened the books of his own bank account. He had personal accountants for his personal accountants. While I was sleeping at the office, reviewing spreadsheets at 2 a.m., making sure our properties were optimized and our portfolios were diversified, my brothers were buying yachts they'd use twice, penthouse apartments they'd never visit, and sports cars they'd crash before the lease was up. But they had their eye on one thing: the money. All of it. And then, my stepmother entered the picture. Beatrice. God, where do I even start with Beatrice? She was 34 years old. My father was 68. She had the kind of beauty that men don't think clearly about: doe eyes, perfect smile, and a laugh that made powerful men forget they had responsibilities. She was a former model who claimed she wanted to settle down and build a real life. My father, lonely after my mother passed away when I was a teenager, fell for it completely. Within 6 months, they were married. And within a year, my father's health was deteriorating rapidly. The doctors said it was stress. I knew it was something darker. Beatrice had him under her thumb. She hired new household staff, people loyal to her. She convinced him to change his will. She introduced him to a new attorney, one she'd chosen. And most critically, she poisoned him against the one person who could see what was happening: me. "Arthur doesn't love you, Elias," I heard her tell him once, her voice dripping with false concern. "He only loves the business. He's already planning what he'll do with your money after you're gone." The lies were so perfectly crafted, so subtle, that my father started to believe them. And my brothers, they amplified them at every turn. It was March 15th when my father's second heart attack happened. More serious this time. The doctors said he had weeks, maybe days. He was in intensive care, and the family was called to gather at his bedside. I was there every single moment. I held his hand. I read to him from the journals of real estate pioneers. I whispered to him about the legacy he'd built, trying to anchor him to life, to fight. My brothers? They were in the hospital cafeteria, taking bets on which properties they'd sell first. Beatrice was worse. She spent her time on the phone with lawyers, my father's lawyers, negotiating the final details of a will that was about to be changed. I could see it in her movements, in her whispered conversations, in the way she'd smile when she thought no one was watching. 3 days before my father died, I confronted her. "I know what you're doing," I said, pulling her into a quiet hallway. "And I won't let you get away with it." She looked at me with pure, undisguised contempt. "Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "your father doesn't even want to look at you anymore. He knows what you are. A drug addict. A failure. A thief who's been stealing from the company for years." None of it was true. Every word was a lie. But she said it with such conviction, with such certainty, that for a moment, I wondered if she'd somehow convinced everyone else too. Because when I walked back to my father's room, something had changed. His eyes, which had always been warm when they looked at me, were now cold. Distant. My brothers wouldn't make eye contact. And Beatrice, she was sitting beside him, holding his hand, whispering something in his ear while he nodded slowly. That night, my father died. The funeral was 5 days later. I gave the eulogy. I talked about his brilliance, his vision, his uncompromising standards. I cried, not because he was gone, but because I knew what was coming. The will was read 4 days after the funeral. I sat in that attorney's office, surrounded by my family, and listened as decades of work, of sacrifice, of blood and sweat were distributed like candy at Halloween. Julian received $15 million in cash in 3 major shopping centers in Texas. Silas received $12 million and controlling interest in 5 residential complexes. Cashin received $10 million and 2 commercial office buildings. My stepmother, Beatrice, received $20 million, the family mansion, and get this, the role of chief executor, which meant she had control over all remaining assets and could liquidate them however she wanted. And me? To my youngest son, Arthur, who has disappointed me greatly, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my personal watch. May he learn the value of hard work. $500,000. When I just watched them hand out over $50 million like it was nothing. The watch was old. Broken. It hadn't kept time in years. I stared at those words, disappointed me greatly, and felt something inside me die. Not the pain of being cheated. Not the anger of being lied about. But the realization that my father had believed them. In his final days, he'd believed that I was a criminal. That I was a failure. That I was unworthy of his legacy. And the worst part? I couldn't even prove them wrong, because I had no resources, no platform, no credibility left. That's when Beatrice stood up from her chair. "Well, gentlemen," she said, her smile absolutely radiant, "I believe we have much to celebrate." She looked directly at me and winked. Winked. "Now, Arthur," she said, her voice sugar-sweet, "I assume you'll be vacating the family residence? You're welcome to stay for one night. In the guest house, of course. You were staff, after all, in all but name." The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. My brothers snickered. And I said nothing. I stood up, took the broken watch, and walked out of that office. That night, I went back to the mansion to collect what few personal items I had. Beatrice had already changed the locks on my old room, so I gathered what I could, a few suits, some books, the broken watch. As I was leaving, I ran into Julian on the front steps. "Hey, little brother," he said, his tone mocking, "where are you headed? The homeless shelter? I heard the downtown one is decent. They give you a blanket and everything." I didn't respond. I just kept walking. Wait, Silas called from behind me. He and Cashin had come out to watch the show. "Don't you want to say goodbye to your family?" They laughed. Hard, cruel laughter that echoed off the marble columns of the entrance. But the worst was yet to come. As I pulled my car up to the gate, my suitcases stacked haphazardly in the trunk, Beatrice appeared on the front steps. She was wearing one of my mother's old scarves. My mother. A woman she'd never met. A woman she'd replaced. "Arthur," she called out, her voice theatrical, "the help shouldn't linger by the front door. It sets a bad example for the new staff. Perhaps through the service entrance next time?" That line, "the help shouldn't stay for dinner," it became her favorite. She used it all the time after that, whenever she was photographed with my brothers at charity galas or society events. But that night, I believed her. I believed I was the help. I believed I was nothing. That night, I slept under the Riverside Bridge. It was March, so it was cold, bone-aching cold, and I had only the jacket on my back and the broken watch in my pocket. I remember sitting against the concrete pillar, watching my breath fog in the air, and thinking about my father. About his last words, "Family is the only thing that lasts." He was wrong. And he'd never know how wrong he'd been. But I was going to make sure the rest of the world did. The next morning, I sold my car for $15,000. I bought a fake ID, a plane ticket to Singapore, and a ticket to my own resurrection. For 7 years, I disappeared. To the world, Arthur Sterling was dead. Or a junkie. Or a homeless guy sleeping under bridges. No one really cared enough to find out. But in Singapore, I was someone else entirely. My new name was Leo Thorne. I rented a small apartment in a nondescript neighborhood, got a job as an accountant at a mid-sized financial firm, and spent my nights doing exactly what I'd been born to do, understanding money. The first year was about learning. I studied every legal framework for international taxation, every loophole in corporate finance, every technique used by the ultra-wealthy to hide their assets. I attended seminars. I read case studies. I became obsessed. The second year was about acting. I noticed patterns in how my father's accounts had been managed. The way certain properties had been restructured. The shell corporations that had appeared after Beatrice took control. The suspicious offshore transfers. They were making mistakes. Big ones. By year 3, I had enough knowledge to start building my own wealth. I took my $15,000 from the car sale and leveraged it with the knowledge I'd accumulated. I started consulting for wealthy clients who needed creative accounting solutions. I was discreet, brilliant, and absolutely untrustworthy, but only to people who deserved it. By year 4, I'd made my first $1 million. By year 5, I had $10 million. By year 6, I had over $100 million. But the money wasn't the point. The money was just the vehicle. The point was the knowledge I was accumulating about my family's weaknesses. And oh, there were so many. Through my network, I learned that without me managing the books, the Sterling companies were hemorrhaging money. My brothers had hired a succession of incompetent managers who couldn't tell the difference between cash flow and liquid assets. The properties were being mismanaged. Tenants were leaving. Maintenance was being deferred. The great empire my father built was slowly, inevitably crumbling. By year 7, I learned the most important piece of information: they were desperate. The Sterling family's cash reserves were nearly depleted. They'd spent so much on maintaining their lifestyle, Beatrice's jewelry, Julian's yacht, Silas's failed cryptocurrency schemes, Cashin's car accidents, that they were facing potential bankruptcy within months. And the only thing that could save them? A massive injection of capital. That's when I made my move. I created Thorne Global Capital, a legitimate, prestigious investment firm with an impeccable track record. I hired a team of brilliant lawyers and accountants. I established an office in Manhattan, right in the heart of the financial district. And I waited for the phone to ring. It took exactly 32 days. Julian called. His voice was strained, desperate. He was trying to hide it under a veneer of casual confidence, but I could hear the panic beneath. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "I represent the Sterling family. We have a real estate portfolio that's looking for investment partners. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership?" I smiled. "I think that can be arranged," I said. "Send me the details." I'm very interested in the Sterling story. There was a pause. How do you know about Sterling? He asked. Lucky guess, I said. Or maybe just good research. I'll see you next week, Julian. I hung up before he could respond. He didn't even know I knew his name. The boardroom was the same one where I'd been humiliated years earlier. Same mahogany table. Same leather chairs. Same view of the city skyline. But everything was different now, because I was different. I had changed my appearance completely. The Arthur Sterling they'd kicked out was young, polished, desperate. Leo Thorne was older, harder, colder. I'd grown a beard dark and carefully groomed. I wore expensive glasses that made me unrecognizable. I'd changed the way I walked, the way I talked, the way I held myself. I was a man who'd spent 7 years learning to become someone else. And my family didn't have a clue. When I walked into that boardroom, the first person I saw was Julian. He'd aged poorly, his face had lines of stress, and he was thinner than I remembered. Silas was there too, nervous energy radiating off him in waves. Cashin looked bored, playing with his phone, not even bothering to pay attention. And then Beatrice walked in. She wore a Chanel suit and diamonds that caught the light like stars. Her hair was done up in an elaborate style, her makeup flawless. She looked like a queen of some dying kingdom, unaware that her reign was about to end. When she saw me, something flickered in her eyes. Not recognition. Just a predatory interest. Mr. Thorne, she said, extending her hand with a smile that could charm a snake. What an absolute pleasure. I've heard such remarkable things about you. I shook her hand. Her skin was soft, perfumed. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to squeeze and not let go. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled back, a smile that was all predator, all snake. The pleasure is entirely mine, Mrs. Sterling, I said. I've been looking forward to this meeting very much. We sat down. Julian nervously explained their situation, the portfolio, the current challenges, their need for capital infusion. He was trying to put the best spin on it, but the desperation was palpable. These people were drowning, and they were grasping at anything that might keep them afloat. I can help you, I said simply. Silas leaned forward. What's your price? That depends, I said, on how much control you're willing to give me. What I proposed was simple. I will personally pay off all your outstanding debts. I've reviewed your financial statements, and you're carrying approximately $47 million in liabilities. I will inject an additional $50 million in working capital. This will stabilize your company and allow you to begin the process of recovery. They stared at me like I'd just offered them salvation. In exchange, I continued, I want 51% ownership of all Sterling companies. And as collateral, I want personal guarantees on all of your individual assets. Your homes. Your vehicles. Your bank accounts. Everything. Cashin looked uncomfortable. That's a lot to give up. Beatrice put her hand on his arm. Hush, Cashin. Mr. Thorne is offering us a lifeline. We'd be foolish to negotiate. She looked at me with something approaching hunger. And I want it in writing, she said. Everything. No ambiguity. No loopholes. I smiled. Of course. I insist on it. That's when I slid the contracts across the table. 40 pages of legal language, prepared by some of the most brilliant lawyers money could buy. The fine print was, well, let's just say the fine print was the entire reason I was there. Because embedded in those contracts, in language so technical and obscure that no one without a law degree and a CPA could understand it, was something delicious. By signing those documents, they weren't just giving me control of their company. They were admitting to prior fraud. They were acknowledging financial irregularities. They were, in essence, confessing to having committed securities fraud when they'd restructured the estate after my father's death. And I'd made sure every meeting, every negotiation, was recorded. High-quality audio. Crystal clear. Admissible in any court in America. Julian flipped through the contracts nervously. This is a lot to digest. Can we take some time to? No, Beatrice said. Her eyes were gleaming. We sign today. She took the pen I offered, a Mont Blanc, very expensive, and signed her name with a flourish. Julian signed next, then Silas, then Cashin. When they finished, I collected the papers slowly. You've made the right decision, I said. Beatrice smiled. I'm glad we understand each other, Mr. Thorne. Oh, Mrs. Sterling, I said quietly, we understand each other perfectly. As they were leaving the boardroom, Beatrice turned back. You know, she said, you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who worked for my husband's company. He was completely incompetent, of course. Never could quite manage things the way they needed to be managed. I looked directly into her eyes. Perhaps he was smarter than you gave him credit for, I said. She laughed, a genuine laugh, beautiful and cruel. I doubt it, she said. He was utterly broken the last time I saw him. 3 weeks later, everything was in place. The contracts had been filed. The funds had been transferred. Thorne Global now owned 51% of all Sterling properties. I was the official CEO of the Sterling Empire. And I'd sent out notices to all the key stakeholders, the board of directors, the major investors, the legal team. There was going to be a family meeting at the Sterling mansion. A celebration, I'd called it. A moment to meet the new leadership and discuss the future. They had no idea what was coming. The mansion looked exactly as I remembered it. The marble columns. The wrought iron gates. The crystal chandeliers visible through the tall windows. I'd spent so many nights here, working in my father's study, believing that I was building something that would last forever. And in a way, I was. I just didn't know it yet. When I arrived, the family was gathered in the main parlor. Champagne was being poured. Beatrice was holding court, telling a story about some social event with laughter that was getting more shrill by the minute. My brothers were relaxing, basking in the belief that they'd made it through the crisis. I walked in, and for a moment, no one noticed me. Then Julian looked up. Mr. Thorne. You came. We were just. He stopped. Because I was no longer wearing the suit and glasses that Leo Thorne usually wore. I was wearing something else. Something I'd kept for 7 years. A jacket old, weathered, dirty from sleeping under bridges. And on my wrist, catching the light from the crystal chandelier, was my father's watch. The broken watch that didn't tell time. Silas stood up slowly. Who are you? It's not possible, Cashin whispered. And Beatrice. Beatrice's champagne glass fell from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. I took off my glasses. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then Julian started laughing. No, this is some kind of prank. Arthur's been gone for 7 years. This is. I'm right here, I said quietly. And I've been waiting for this moment. Beatrice's face had gone completely white. Arthur, she said, her voice barely a whisper. How is this, you couldn't have known where every penny went? I said. How to restructure the company from the inside. How to make myself indispensable. I walked to the center of the room and looked at each of them, my brothers, my stepmother, the people who'd convinced my dying father that I was worthless. 7 years ago, you told me that family is the only thing that lasts. But then you destroyed me. You forged my father's will. You drugged him. You drugged him so he couldn't defend me, couldn't protect the legacy he'd built. Silas's face was red with rage. You have no proof of any of. Wrong, I said. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the coffee table. I have everything. Every fraudulent transaction. Every shell corporation. Every bribe you attempted to give Leo Thorne. Every meeting where you discussed how to hide the money from the IRS. I pressed play. And the room filled with the sound of their own voices. Beatrice, talking about how to move money overseas. Julian, discussing how to restructure the company to avoid taxes. Silas, laughing about finding loopholes. Cashin, even dumb Cashin, saying things that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. No, Beatrice said, shaking her head. No, you can't, this is entrapment. This is, your family. You wouldn't do this to family. You're right, I said. I wouldn't do this to family. I'm doing it to criminals. That's when I heard it. The sound I'd been waiting for. Sirens. Getting closer. Getting louder. Outside the window, police cars were pulling up to the mansion. Lots of them. I had my lawyers send all of this to the FBI 2 weeks ago, I said. They've been reviewing it. And they've decided there's enough to press charges. Securities fraud. Tax evasion. Wire fraud. Witness intimidation. And, I paused. Looking directly at Beatrice, conspiracy to commit fraud in connection with a will. You bastard, Julian spat. You goddamned bastard. Probably, I agreed. But at least I'm a bastard who remembers. As the police officers walked through the front door and began reading them their rights, I stood in the center of that magnificent room and felt something shift inside me. Not happiness, exactly. Not vindication, though there was some of that. But something more fundamental. A sense of completion. A sense that the universe, despite everything, had a way of balancing itself out. Beatrice was being led away, handcuffed, still in denial. You can't do this, she was saying. We're family. Family is supposed to stab each other in the back while someone's dying? I said. To forge documents? To lie to a man on his deathbed? She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes. Recognition, finally. The understanding that she'd underestimated me. That I'd been playing a game she couldn't even comprehend. Arthur, she said, and her voice was small, almost childlike, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, okay? He was going to leave everything to you anyway. I just wanted some security. I just wanted to be a good person? I finished. Too late. They took her away. They took all of them away. And I stood alone in my father's mansion, in the room where he'd taken his last breath, wearing the jacket I'd had on the night they'd thrown me onto the streets, and looked at the broken watch in my hand. Somehow, impossibly, it had started ticking again. The trials lasted 14 months. Every sordid detail came out. The forged will. The medications that had been given to my father to cloud his judgment. The bribery of the original attorney. The shell corporations. The tax evasion schemes. All of it. My brothers each received sentences ranging from 5 to 8 years. They'll be out by their 60s, assuming they behave themselves. They won't. Beatrice received 12 years. She'll be in her 40s when she gets out, and she'll never work again. No respectable company will hire her. She'll be a footnote in business school case studies about fraud and greed. The Sterling Empire was restructured. I donated $30 million to medical research in my father's name. Another $20 million went to a foundation for orphans. The properties were properly managed again, profitable again, generating income that will benefit people for decades. But the best part? I found something in my father's safe. Something that changed everything. It was a letter. Dated 3 days before he died. To Arthur, it read, "If you're reading this, then I was weak at the end. I was confused. I let people poison me against the one person who actually loved me. I realize that now. I'm leaving you this letter because I need you to know the truth. You were always the one. You were always the heir. You were always the legacy I built this for. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger at the end. I'm sorry I believed them instead of believing in you. But maybe if you're reading this, you'll understand that in this family, in this life, the only thing that lasts is the truth. The broken watch I left you was your mother's. I carried it every day after she died, and it reminded me that even broken things can still keep time, can still mark the important moments. Make it whole again, Arthur. And make sure the world knows what you were worth. Your father. I didn't know it then, but my father had been fighting back. Even as the medication clouded his mind, even as Beatrice and my brothers whispered their poison, he'd managed to leave me a message. A proof. A legacy that went beyond money. He'd believed in me. Even when he couldn't say it out loud, even when everyone was telling him I was worthless, a part of him knew the truth. Today, I'm sitting in my father's study, my study now, and that broken watch is on the desk in front of me. It's been repaired. A master watchmaker in Switzerland spent 6 months restoring it to its original beauty. Now it keeps perfect time. The Sterling Empire is thriving again. Better than it ever was under my brother's management. The properties are well maintained. The tenants are happy. The company is profitable. But the real success isn't measured in dollars or properties. It's measured in the moment when my stepmother finally understood that she'd made an enemy of the only person she should have been trying to protect. It's measured in the fact that my family was brought to justice not through violence or anger, but through law and evidence. It's measured in the knowledge that when the world tried to break me, I didn't break. I adapted. I learned. I became something stronger than revenge. I became proof that some things can't be destroyed by lies, that the truth has a way of surfacing, that karma isn't just something we hope for. It's real. And it's patient. For 7 years, I lived as a ghost. I haunted the margins of the world, invisible, learning, building, waiting. And when I finally manifested, I didn't come back as a vengeful spirit. I came back as the very thing they feared most, someone who knew the truth. My father was right about one thing: family is the only thing that lasts. But family isn't about blood. It's about truth. It's about loyalty to something bigger than yourself. It's about building legacies that outlive betrayal. And I've done exactly that. If this story gave you chills, if you felt that deep, satisfying sense of justice when Arthur revealed himself in that mansion, smash the like button. Tell me in the comments, what's the most satisfying revenge you've ever witnessed? And of course, subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are thousands more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories of people who refused to stay broken. Stories of ghosts who came home. Thanks for watching. See you next time.